Alright, before we get into this, I just have to apologize for the variance and overall low quality of the footage. Evidently, I do not know how to crop Game Boy Player in OBS. And if you can do better, feel free to teach me because I'm trying to figure this one out. But I had all this footage of my Pokemon Let's Play and I could just throw it away or I could do something with it. And it didn't feel right to just throw it away, so I'm gonna use it for a review. Anyway, Pokemon Red. It is one of 2 in North America and 3 in Japan's start to the Pokemon series, Satoshi Tajiri's magnum opus that came after several other games that he had made. And it's actually kind of surprising that we got this game, because when this game was pitched a bunch of times under the name Capumon, or Capsule Monsters, it was actually turned down a whole bunch of times. But this game was ultimately trying to allow kids to experience the joys of bug catching if they grew up in an urban area, because that was one of the creator's greatest passions when he was a child. And he was trying to spread his childhood to other children, and in turn he helped form my childhood. This is the very first Pokemon game I ever played, and it's a game I'm very, very nostalgic for. And it's definitely a very important game in the games industry, and having played it again recently, I can tell you, it's not that good. But I think context is important, because back in the day, there really wasn't anything quite like this. I mean, there was Sansara Naga on the Famicom, which was kind of sort of similar, but there was nothing that was really all that successful. This was the one that really kicked off the whole catch things, raise them, beat the snot out of your opponent sort of genre that we kind of take for granted today. So it's very important, especially in terms of game history, and how it's shaped us as a culture, because at this point it's Japan's biggest export, but at the same time, it feels very, very dated. Now the story is you're 10, allegedly, and that somehow grants you the right to run away from home, get a Pokemon trainer's license, which entitles you to capture monsters, and release them to do your bidding, potentially taking over the entire world. Seriously, I'm in my 20s, I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility, let alone a 10-year-old given the keys to the entire infinite cosmos in terms of just sheer power? Okay. And on your quest to gain as many friends as possible, you have to defeat the greatest evil of all, this jerk, Fafimon. And also a terrorist organization, as well as a bunch of gym leaders to collect gym badges so that you can go and fight the Elite Four, who, if you read the manga, were terrorists in their own right, but in here they're just really, really good Pokemon trainers, and ultimately prove that you are emphatically the very best, like no one ever was. In fact, this whole point is so important, they actually wrote a song about it. Unfortunately, I can't remember the lyrics offhand. Sorry. Now, Pokemon is a monster catching and raising RPG. The idea is, very early on, you are given access to one of 3 starter monsters, a very small turtle, a vegetable, and Charmander, who is basically the greatest thing ever. I mean, come on. It's a dinosaur and a flamethrower. How is that not the best thing? And as you go out on your adventures, you capture new monsters and raise them up to be your bestest friends, so that you can go and defeat more powerful monsters and prove again that you are top dog. In terms of actual mechanics RPG-wise, it's fairly standard. You've got a set of 4 attacks on any one monster, and as your monster learns new attacks, you can replace previously existing ones. You fight random enemies that attack you, you fight other Pokemon trainers to defeat their teams, and you gain experience, thus leveling up your whole team. Now, what makes it important as a monster catching RPG is, of course, the monster catching aspect. The idea that you run into these random monsters on the field, you then prove that you are about to be their very best friend by beating the ever-living snot out of them, probably poisoning them, and then cramming them into a very tiny, confined space that probably has no air in it, releasing it only to do your bidding when you feel like. Yeah, Pokemon was kind of morally weird at this time. I mean, it still is in a lot of ways, but Gen 1 Pokemon had trainers running around with whips and stuff, and I mean, there's an area you go to that's basically a giant mass grave, where you run into your rival and he tells you he lost one of his monsters and it's no longer part of his team. It's just, this is a game that has gambling in it. Like, you have to sit down and play a slot machine on end in order to purchase one of the monsters that you can't get anywhere else. This game is just, how did this fly by Nintendo censorship policies? Somehow Nintendo allowed it, but why? How? What? I don't understand how this series exists after this, but it does. And the monster catching aspect, it works pretty well for the most part. That said, it is Gen 1 monsters, so while catching monsters is about as hard as it's always been, there's also an extra layer of you are so bad at catching monsters, you somehow threw the ball straight into the air and clocked yourself on the head and lost the ball in the process. Because you can miss. Why? But I think this game has a lot of problems in it. First and foremost are just simple quality of life issues that have somewhat been addressed since then. I mean, first and foremost, HMs exist, and I mean, they still exist, and why do they still exist? Seriously, swap HMs out for items, and then I don't have to drag a Tropus all over Pokemon Ruby just for the sake of the fact it can learn all the HM moves. Seriously, HMs suck. But HMs exist, and unlike previous games where you could walk up to the water, press A, and say, do you want to use Surf? No, instead you have to go through your menu, and then go through a second menu, and then select the monster that has Surf, select its abilities, and then select Surf. And you have to do that every single time you want to use an HM, which should not exist in the first place, but I'm trying to get off that. So HMs are, well, they're still horrible, but they were horrible-er to begin with, simply because nowadays you can just select the thing that you want to cut down if you're into a shrub, and, well, suddenly it's gone. But in this one you can't, and it's slow and cumbersome and really obnoxious, and it just feels like finicky extra work. And that's not where all of this ends. TMs are one use, and most of them can't be reacquired after you get them. There's only one instance of each of them. So if you want to teach a monster a very specific skill, you better hope that you don't want to teach any other monsters said exact same skill. There's no breeding, so you can't later pass on said abilities onto next generations. So it's really weird in terms of abilities. Also, while we're on the subject of just weird things about this game, just being cited by anyone else just immediately triggers a battle. I know that's a thing that's been with the series even till now, but still, I don't get why that's a thing. But getting off of just quality of life things that have since for the most part been taken care of, one of the biggest issues Pokemon Gen 1 has is it feels very stale in terms of fighting. And this was one of my biggest issues across my entire Let's Play here, is there are only 150 monsters that are obtainable in-game. Ignoring the fact that you have to trade to get a bunch of them, and one requires a Game Shark, but the point is, there's 150 at best. And across them is a rock, paper, scissors style weakness chart, and that's really genuinely interesting. It means that you can plan for success. If this one guy is this one element, I could use this other element and take him out, but I can't use this other specific element, or he'll take me out because he's more effective. That's great, I love that. But again, have you ever counted 150 things? Because, while a child might see 150 as being this giant insurmountable mountain of a number, I used to have a poster of original Pokemon. Of all 150 of them, 150 is not a lot. So if ultimately you divide all the different monsters across all of the elements evenly, and they don't, you have maybe 5 monsters per element, and you're probably wondering, where am I going with this? Aside from the fact that each element is very limited, every trainer you run into is an archetype, and their archetype ends up dictating what monsters they're going to use. So, if you run into a bug catcher, you're going to run into every instance of Weedle in its evolutions, and every instance of Caterpie in its evolutions. And that's it. If you run into a bird keeper, I really hope you like fighting Pidgeys and Spearows, because unless you get lucky and run into one that has a Doduo, that's it. If you run into a sailor, I hope you like Tentacools, Machokes, and maybe if you're lucky Voltorbs, because that's your lot. That's the thing. Every trainer you run into falls into a specific archetype, and the moment you see them on screen, you can kind of pretty much say, okay, this one guy's going to use nothing but water guys. Oh, say hello to my Jolteon, he's going to one-shot all of you. And it just makes fighting enemies kind of boring, because you automatically know exactly what you're going to run into before you run into it. And nowadays this has been kind of fixed where trainers tend to have a wider variety of monsters, simply by virtue of the fact that there's more, but at the same time, that just makes things really boring here. And maybe that is just simply by virtue of the fact that this was the first iteration to come along, so it didn't have anything to challenge, but honestly, playing this again was really bland. I tried to fight every trainer I could, and by the end of it, I gave up. I just ran from most fights, just because screw it. It was not worth my time just to try and get the experience. And ironically, the solution to this is the thing I dump on the series the most for, because every iteration they add more monsters, which is great, but then they have to rework the entire element system, and eventually you can't figure out what Ghost is good against or what Dark is good against, because Dark seems to be bad against everything. It's a hard system to try and work with, because you try and solve the problem and you end up creating the complete opposite pendulum effect of a problem. Because now you've got way too many monsters and it's way too overly complicated. And that's why we now have a thing in Pokemon Sun and Moon that tells us, hey, this move's good against the enemy. Just saying. Probably use it. But that's not the only problem Gen 1 Pokemon has. The other problem, well, the other really big problem that I'd like to talk about is balance. So let's look at Pokemon elements for just a second here, okay? Psychic types. Psychic types are OP. In fact, there's very few Psychic types in this game. You can only get, before beating the game, a total of 5 of them. And one of them you have to trade with someone else to get, which kind of sucks. But Psychics are so powerful. I remember even in the anime, which very early on at least existed for the purpose of teaching you how to play the game, and it was very good at doing that. I don't know what they're doing now, and I don't care. Even in the anime, they kind of pointed out how OP Psychics were, because in the anime they just ran from the lady who had Psychics. Because she was just too powerful and there's nothing good against them. Dragons. Dragons are weak to Dragon. And I think maybe Ice, but there isn't really too many Ice abilities in this game. But in terms of dragons, there's one monster. And it's 2 evolutions, but still, at its core, one monster. And ironically, there's only one dragon element attack. And that attack does fixed damage. So it doesn't matter if it would be effective against him. It's not going to do any more damage or any less damage than any other monster it would be used on. But that's not the end of the weird balance issues, because if you try and run into the first and only optional encounter with your rival, Phaphimon, he's gonna be levels above you, because it's very early on, and suddenly he jumps to like level 15, and you're like level 5 still. I think that's because he's a terrible Pokemon trainer, because he relies on over-leveling, but still, there's just weird level gaps. The first gym you run into is Rock Element. And if you pick the vegetable or the turtle at the start, well, you're still not going to be very effective because you don't have your element attacks at that point unless you grind it, but he's not going to be crazy effective against you. If you picked Charmander, you're well and truly screwed, because even if you learned your element attacks, he's still weak to rock. And I don't just mean, well, you need to select a different monster that would be more effective, because there's literally nothing you can get up to that point that's more effective against him. Because before that, you can run into poison types, normal types, bug types, and if you're lucky, and I use the term loosely, a Pikachu. All of which will be curb stomped by a rock type. In fact, the immediate go-to to defeat rocks is water types. And the earliest water type you can get, not counting that joke Magikarp you can get, isn't until like halfway through the game. But that's not where the balance issues end either, because let's just flip to the other side of the game and go to the Elite Four, which is a gauntlet match against 4 very superb trainers, plus, spoilers alert, a 5th trainer. Well, they basically all have one specific element, like a gym leader, so if you're good against that element, that's great. But if you're not power leveling at this point, they're still going to be about 10 to 15 levels above you. So unless you're really, really fast, or you hit really, really hard, these guys will still wreck you. And even if you manage to get past the 4th member of the Elite Four, who uses Dragon types, by the way, again going back to Dragon types being kind of broken, well, suddenly then you have to go fight your rival, the champion, Phaphimon, yet again. And again, proving that he's a terrible Pokemon trainer and needing to power level, well, he's about 15 levels above every member of the Elite Four, which means he's probably about 25 levels above you. Yep. I mean, on the bright side, it's kind of fascinating from a historical perspective to see this, simply because I think this is what ultimately created the Pokemon competitive concept of every turn that your monster is physically attacking your opponent, they need to be moving first and they need to take him out in one turn. I think that's sort of the genesis of it, and that's genuinely fascinating. But from a gameplay perspective, it's obnoxious. I mean, I managed to beat him 25 levels below him, but I was just reading a guide that was sort of recommending levels at this point. They recommended you be 10 levels above him, and that would have required so many hours of grinding to gain like 35 levels, which, no. It's just peculiar how much physical leveling is required in this game, and they're not super hard fights or anything, but just from the perspective of stats, they are ridiculous. And they're an end challenge, so I get it, but at the same time, it just feels cheap. So while the core mechanics of original Pokemon work, they definitely needed to be touched up, and they've since done that, again, for the most part. But Pokemon is also a as I mentioned, kind of a pendulum effect in terms of fixing things, because for everything they add or fix, they immediately remove something or break something else. So it's a little awkward to see, but this is its roots, and they work. Just be prepared to grind a little. Now, the overall presentation to Pokemon Red is fantastic, but again, context is necessary. If we're going from the context of now, it's gonna look completely weird because this game worked on the original Pokemon designs, whereas Pokemon we understand today was actually based on the designs from the anime, which refined the designs from the original game. So they're actually like 2 degrees removed from their actual original designs nowadays. And what's fascinating from a historical perspective is these aren't even the original designs. These are updated. The North American release got an update visually and audibly from the Japanese versions. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But I like these designs. Yeah, they look a little strange compared to what we experience today, but still, they look quite good. And there's quite a lot of different monster designs. The different sprites and environmental designs are great. Visually, it's quite a feast for the eyes, especially for the time. Audio-wise, I think this game could use a lot more music and a lot more varied music, but it's okay. I really do not like the cave theme though. I do not like it. It's in pretty much all the caves, as I just said, and the caves are where the kind of awkward puzzles are, which will mean you're probably going to spend an unnecessary amount of time listening to them. It'll get to you after a while. But audio-wise, it's alright, leading to an overall pretty great presentation. Now, if you want to get a copy of Pokemon Red, there was also Pokemon Blue. The difference was different individual monsters you could get. There was also Pokemon Yellow, which forced you to use Pikachu, which made fighting Brock even worse. Made you really appreciate Pidgey's sand attack, I'll tell you that much. It's actually pretty expensive. Last I checked, Pokemon Red, no guarantee on the battery, just cart only, was $40, $50. I mean, I lucked out with this copy I bought for my birthday for about $20, but it's definitely up in price, and I would recommend it mostly for the historians. That said, if you want to get the Japanese versions of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green, notice that I added one extra, it's about $5. So you can get them all pretty dirt cheap, but again, they're going to be in Japanese, but at the same time, it is Pokemon, you can probably make it through it no problem. Going back to mentioning that we got a bit of an update and that there were actually 3 original Pokemon games in Japan. I want to clear up a misconception from my childhood, if nothing else just to appease child me here. Now, back in the day, we heard that while we got Pokemon Red and Blue, Japan got this mysterious Pokemon Green, and it must be amazing, right? Well, no. Actually, it's not. It's literally what we know as Pokemon Blue, with some different visual and audio design choices. Because the deal is, in Japan they released Pokemon Red and Green. Eventually, through a magazine, you could order Pokemon Blue, which was basically the exact same game with a audio and sprite overhaul, as well as having a slightly different pool of catchable monsters. Instead, I think you could now catch Mr. Mime, Lickitung, and Jinx, which were not immediately available in the original Pokemon Red and Green. Now, when we got Pokemon Red and Blue in North America, what we got was actually Pokemon Red and Green, but with the sprite update and the audio update. So really, if you're gonna go out and try and buy the mythical weird Pokemon from Japan that we never got, you don't want Green, because you'll be getting Blue. You actually want Pokemon Blue, because that's the weird thing that was an update that we never really saw. But that said, Pokemon Red and Green have the weirder, like, 1.0 sprites that we never got. And they look even stranger than the ones we have, if you can believe it. So that's the mystery of Pokemon Red and Blue and Green. We later get Yellow, where you can play as Pikachu, which, no thank you. Later, it would explode into the successful franchise that became Japan's greatest export. And ultimately, the thing Satoshi Tajiri is known best for. That said, is it really that great a game? Well, at its core mechanics, yeah, but there's a lot of things in terms of balance and tweaking that really need to be addressed. And fortunately, they did a lot of that in the second generation of Pokemon, which unfortunately I do not have a copy on hand to talk about. But that said, that one is significantly better than this one. But this one is great if you're nostalgic for it, and if you want a little bit of a window to the past as to what made Pokemon what it is today. That said, if you're looking from this from a completely objective standpoint, or, I mean, hell, I'm horribly using rose-tinted glasses here, it's still not that great. And I'm not saying that as someone who doesn't have someone to trade to get all the monsters from, which that was a dumb design decision that still exists today, unfortunately, because money. But still, as a game, It's good, but it needs a lot of polishing, and fortunately we would get at least some polishing over the years. But if nothing else, this game exists to capture a man's childhood and to give it to someone else. And in turn, it built this man's childhood. The question is, can Lagi survive an attack from this guy? I guess we'll find out. I missed. Ice beam, don't kill me, 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 crap!